Good morning. Wow, Joe, thank you for that introduction. Joe insisted on introducing me, even though I've been here for a while, and so I was ready for it. And so I thought maybe Joe will say some nice things, which he did, which is great. I'm like, Joe's definitely going to throw something in to jab at me, because that's just who Joe is. If you know Joe, he's just a bit of a punk. And so this actually works out wonderfully, because I kind of Googled Joe Manafo to see what do you get, and this is what you get. You get Joe Manafo wearing the same shirt Joe Manafo is wearing today. Sarah, you got to get this guy some clothes. It's like, this is my favorite. So here, I feel like here he's like auditioning for like a Blink-182 kind of like tribute band. It's the black sweater. Oh, but what's that underneath? Oh, there it is. There's the shirt. It's like, and I love this picture because you get the Joe and the eyebrows and all their glory, and it is just great. But it's been a treat to be a part of this team. I love it. If you are not aware, we as a staff, we really love each other. And we have a lot of fun together. We laugh together. It's been a treat for me and my family to be part of this church. And it's an honor to be up here. I do oversee youth and young adult ministries here at the church. If you've been on the website to kind of explore who our team is, you may have been a bit confused because I just got a bit of a different look since when I arrived back in the fall. And many of you asked, when you got here, did Joe make you cut your hair? And it's like, yeah, he did. So whatever, I've kind of always been known for my hair a little bit, so here's me in high school. Hey, before you laugh, valedictorian, all right? Doesn't matter that there's only 5 other people in my class, but whatever, So this is me in high school, and this is kind of for the parents in the room of the teenagers. When you feel like your son or daughter is going through some ridiculous stage, some style has taken over your household, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. It's just a phase. It'll pass. They'll grow out of it. Somehow I convinced a girl to hang out with me, and today my wife Tara and I are actually celebrating our 12th anniversary, which is pretty fun. So yeah, hard to believe. I'm only 25 and I've been married for 12 years. It's crazy. But we have 2 kids. You may have seen them running around the building. They feel like this church is like their giant playground, and so they treat it like their own. And so Theo is 5, and Penelope is 2.5. And the reality is, I love my kids. I love them to death. But I never wanted a daughter, right? Like, we love Penny. She's ours. We're not giving her back. But like, I used to talk about this to Tara. I'd be like, I'm not sure that I want a little girl. I don't want a baby girl. Because I've paid attention, and baby girls grow into teenage girls. And what do you find around teenage girls? Teenage boys, right? And I'm like, I don't want none of those teenage boys around, like all that kind of stuff. And so I'm trying to explain this to Tara, and the language maybe got a little colorful, so I'm going to sort of edit it for church appropriateness. So I'm going to substitute in the word unicorn, and you can just use your imagination to fill in the blanks. And I'm like, Tara, you got to understand that I don't want a little girl because I don't want those little unicorns touching my daughter, It's like I'm not up for that. And somebody else can have girls in the family. I like little baby girls. It'd be great. Someone else can have one, and I'll have a niece. That'll be awesome. We'll have nieces in the family. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, those little unicorns better not touch my nieces. It's like I don't want any of that. Now, the reality is like where's this coming from? Is I was a teenage boy, I was there. I was around teenage boys when I was younger. I was one of those teenage boys. And this has shaped my outlook on life. And this is the same for all of us. Our story informs the lens that we look through in life. Stephen Covey puts it this way. He says, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And our experiences shape the way that we see the world around us. And we're going to see this today through the lens of Solomon that is embodied in the book of Proverbs. Now, we're pretty confident that Solomon himself did not personally pen all of the Proverbs we find in the Bible, but there was a clear effort by the sages who collected these proverbs to embody the ways of Solomon. This is how Leo Perdue explains it. He says, the association of the book of Proverbs with Solomon is based on what may have been a long-standing tradition that depicts him as the wisest of the kings, the creator of wisdom texts, and the patron of the sages. So we've been looking through this collection throughout the summer. And this collection, as it was put together, there was a sense of attributing credit to Solomon and embodying his ways. And you've possibly heard of Solomon. You've maybe heard how in Scripture there's a story when God says to Solomon, I want to give you a gift. And Solomon, rather than asking for riches or fame, he asks for wisdom, right? And God bestows wisdom upon him. So you've maybe heard of Solomon referred to as, the wisest of all. You may or may not be aware that even though Solomon, this wise one, this king of Israel, he didn't exactly have a squeaky clean track record. Okay, so we know this from 1 Kings chapter 11 when it says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. So while Solomon was attributed as the wisest of all, this guy's life was far from spotless. And this was his story. And this is the lens that the sages would have looked through as they compiled the Proverbs. And this is the lens that we're going to try to look through as we read from Proverbs chapter 7 this morning. Now, you need to understand that the first 9 chapters of the Proverbs are a bit unique from the rest of the collection. In previous weeks, we've seen the sort of like choppy, kind of sliced up words of wisdom that dominate this book. The first 9 chapters are unique in that, each chapter carries a consistent theme and thought through the chapter. And this is the form of chapter 7 that we're going to see today. So rather than like a quick punch in the arm, this proverb, it resonates and it reads like a parable. So let's read Proverbs 7 right now. Follow my advice, my son. Always treasure my commands. Obey my commands and live. Guard my instructions as you guard your own eyes. Tie them on your fingers as a reminder. Write them deep within your heart. Love wisdom like a sister. Make insight a beloved member of your family. Let them protect you from an affair with an immoral woman, from listening to the flattery of a promiscuous woman. While I was at the window of my house, looking through the curtain, I saw some naive young men, and one in particular who lacked common sense. He was crossing the street near the house of an immoral woman, strolling down the path by her house. It was at twilight, in the evening, as deep darkness fell. The woman approached him, seductively dressed and sly of heart. She was the brash, rebellious type, never content to stay at home. She is often in the streets and markets, soliciting at every corner. She threw her arms around him and kissed him, and with a brazen look she said, I've just made my peace offerings and fulfilled my vows. You're the one I was looking for. I came out to find you, and here you are. My bed is spread with beautiful blankets with colored sheets of Egyptian linen. I perfume my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink our fill of love until morning. Let's enjoy each other's caresses, for my husband is not home. He's away on a long trip. He's taken a wallet full of money with him, and he won't return until later this month. So she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery. He followed her at once, like an ox going to the slaughter. He was like a stag caught in a trap, awaiting the arrow that would pierce its heart. He was like a bird flying into a snare, little knowing it would cost him his life. Oops. So listen to me, my sons, and pay attention to my words. Don't let your heart stray away toward her. Don't wander down her wayward path, for she has been the ruin of many, many men have been her victims. Her house is the road to the grave. Her bedroom is the den of death. So as we navigate this kind of interesting narrative, we need to kind of establish a few guideposts along the way. So first, we must remember that this parable, where it comes from, and the lens that we're looking through, echoes of Solomon's life are evident in this story. And scholars are convinced that the immoral woman in the story was a worshiper of a fertility goddess, like a temple prostitute. The combination of sexual encounters with sacrificial offerings was a very common practice among the neighboring religions at that time. And the image of a man looking out as the scene unfolds gives the sense that he's been there before. He knows the sly heart that lies beneath her seductive ways. He has looked into those brazen eyes before and felt the lure of her flattering words. He sees the trap that lies ahead. He has fallen into that snare before. So the writer of this proverb is capturing the perspective of Solomon, the wise old man who could easily look out and see his foolish ways revisited by the foolish young men around him. And this is where it's so important that we remember that this is a lens. And this perspective is being used to help us see that there are lures in life trying to draw us all into a trap. And you must understand that this proverb is not simply a message about sex. In fact, it's not even really about sex at all, I would say. This narrative is intended to take us to a place of reflection and consider, what traps do I need to be aware of in my own life? We all know that temptation comes in different forms. And this parable is a reminder of the hook that we often fail to recognize in the lures of life. And there are some helpful principles that we can extract from this narrative regarding temptation. So the first thing is, we shouldn't be surprised when sin smells fresh. A few weeks ago, Jared brought us the truth from the Proverbs that there is a way that seems right, but it leads to death. And we need to recognize that it's not surprising when sin seems enticing and smells fresh. It seems good. But walking in the ways of wisdom is learning to know God's ways, trusting that He is leading us in the way of life. And in doing so, we learn to recognize the rotting mess that lies beneath the sweet scent of temptation. This passage also reminds us of the ways that temptation can play with our ego. It messes with our mind, whispering, "You deserve this." When the economy hasn't been going your way, and you've been doing hard, honest work, and it just isn't adding up, and an opportunity for shady business comes along, the lure of temptation whispers, "You've earned this." When the newest model is released with the promise of upgraded features and top-of-the-line specs, temptation draws us in with the assurance that you need this. You can't miss out on what this has to offer. When your relationship with your spouse is rocky and you're not feeling heard or appreciated, the temptation of the bottle or the laptop or whatever it might be, it plays with your ego, assuring us that you deserve a break from all this. You've earned the soothing escape from your life. See, sin, it messes with our ego, telling us that we deserve this. Or on the flip side, sin can play around with our lack of self-worth, telling us that this is what you deserve. It lies to us, convincing us that the pain and disappointment that we are caught up in, we deserve it. And so you might as well not look for the way out and finding your way out of this mess, because this is what you are due. You see, sin, it exposes our weakness. It knows our vulnerability. And my weakness is always believing too much of myself. Sin messes with my ego, telling me that I've dealt enough with the kids. I've put in my work in the house, and I've earned my indulgence. I deserve my escape. And for my wife, Tara, it's very different. When she feels unappreciated, sin messes with her ego, assuring her that she's a horrible mother. She's a terrible wife, and she should feel like a failure. And it pulls her deeper into that mindset and tells her this is how it's always going to be. So we should be aware that the smells of sin might seem good and recognize the ways that it plays with our ego. And all through that, we have to understand, as this proverb reminds us, that this is all a path to death. And we know the hook lies within the lure. I could get up here and try to paint a picture. I could plaster stats about, like the devastating impact of pornography on our culture, especially among young minds and that are living in this kind of sexually saturated world. But I'm sure that I don't need to convince anybody of that. If you've wandered down that lonely path, you know the darkness that lies behind the alluring images. You felt the hollow feeling of regret and shame. It's the same deal with our wallets. I don't need to convince you of the pitfalls of letting greed take the wheel in your life. Many of us know the empty reality that comes from putting our hope in the promise of a new flat screen or loaded features on the new ride or extravagant trips. We've felt the turbulence of debt and the hollow feeling of empty promises from the things that we buy. And the lure can be so tempting. And whatever temptation has gripped you in the past, I'm sure you have felt the hook that lies within the lure. And so this proverb, it reminds us that the sweet aromas and alluring promises of sin only are masking a dark path that leads to brokenness and regret. And so as we learn to recognize the hook within the lure of temptation, this proverb, it urges us to see that the wise way that we've been hearing about this summer, the wise way is a path of resistance. You see, there is a better way. We don't need to go down those paths any longer. Once we learn to recognize the snare behind the seduction, we need to find ways to embrace the wise way of life by resisting the ways of death. And so there's a few important questions that we need to ask. First is do you know what the lure looks like in your life? Can you name it? Do you know the temptation that often smells good and it draws you in? And are you part of a community where you can process that together? Are you experiencing the safety and security of trusting relationships to speak honestly about life? And do you have a vision of what resistance looks like? Can you imagine a better way? Can you picture yourself freed from the snares, able to recognize the hook within the lure, choosing the better way? Because you see, resistance is bigger than determination. Over the years, I've journeyed alongside many, many young people as they navigate struggles with alcohol and self-esteem, pornography, and the list goes on and on. And something that I say to each of them is the importance of learning to try smarter, not just try harder. You see, whatever our struggle might be, there's a sense within each of us that we must simply just dig in our heels and be determined not to let sin have its way with us. We want to try harder, but maybe we need to learn to try smarter. Resisting the lure of temptation means recognizing the ways that sin and temptation comes at us and learning to change the patterns and rhythms of our life. And so maybe it's time to make some changes in your life. Maybe you have seen these patterns. You've recognized the hook. You've felt it. And resisting means making a shift. Maybe it's time to charge your cell phone in the kitchen rather than in your bedroom. Maybe it's time to join a small group so that you can experience that support of community. Maybe it's time to map out a budget and have something guiding that spending. Maybe it would be helpful to start taking a walk after supper to give your mind an opportunity to rest from the day's stress. Maybe you need to find some ways to turn down the volume on the negative voices in your life. Maybe cutting off the Netflix subscription, even for a month, would be a helpful reset for some of the patterns in your life. But can you name the lure that easily snags you? Can you imagine your life freed from those traps? And are you just going to dig your heels in, or are you going to resist by changing the rhythms in your life? And this proverb, it reminds us that our hope for experiencing freedom, it doesn't all depend on us. We have the hope of knowing that it's not on our own strength that we overcome, but it actually comes from holding our Redeemer close. And God doesn't call us to sort this all out on our own. He doesn't call us to get our act together by ourselves. He calls us to join Him. He's at work in our lives, trying to show us the path to the wise way. And God, He wants us to understand the snare behind the lure. But He's not trying to kick us in the gut. He wants us to know that there is a better way. He is renewing all things, and that includes the patterns of our lives. This is how the writer of Hebrews expresses it. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. You see, we've experienced the pitfalls of giving in to temptation, but there is another way, a way of life, a wise way that we were made to live in. And Jesus is our hope that life is actually possible. When we fix our gaze on Jesus, we learn to see that the lures that draw us in do not have the final word. Jesus gives us hope that we can throw off those chains. We can imagine a new future because He is renewing everything. He offers us the strength to resist the empty ways of death and embrace the life that we were made for. There's one other way that sin lies to us, though. And it's by telling us that, we're disqualified because of our failures. Many of us, we've all, let's be honest, we've all been hooked by the lure. We've fallen into the traps, and we've been left feeling wounded and not worthy to be used by God. And this proverb, it offers us a reminder that God works in mighty ways among the misfits and failures. Solomon failed. So much was expected of him. Leader of a nation, the wise one that people look to for counsel. But he failed. He failed big. And the Proverbs as a whole are a reminder that God works in the midst of the mess. We sometimes believe that the people found in the Bible, these pure and noble examples of godliness, are the ones that we should learn to live like. But Lionel Windsor, he helps us clarify the way we look at the lives of the people found in the Scriptures. This is what he says. Most of the human characters in the Bible stories, even some of the most faithful ones, are morally dubious at best. In fact, many of their activities are downright sordid. You're not supposed to read these stories as direct examples for your own life. You're meant to read them to understand God's actions in the midst of tragic human history. So from the ashes of Solomon's failures comes these words of insight. Solomon fell into the traps of temptation, and yet God's renewal work continues. Solomon's story, even his great failures, can be used by God to give us warning, to give us guidance, to give us perspective. And you see, part of my story is the truth that, man, I was such a little unicorn, right? I've had many, many failures and regrets. But when I feel like I'm disqualified because of my past, I remember that God works in the midst of the mess. And He's shown me that my story, my failures can actually be used by God. I can see the temptations that young people are facing, and I can warn them that there's snares. I've been down those paths. It smells good, but trust me, I know what's behind that. I can let others see renewal work in my life and show them God has done amazing things in my life. If you would have known me when I was young and you know me now, you'd be amazed, and that's a sign that God is at work. He truly does change people, and we are not disqualified because of our mistakes. And we're not disqualified because of where we have come from. Over the years, I've worked alongside several youth leaders who have come from difficult homes, families scattered with abuse and abandonment. And maybe you know someone with that kind of a story, or maybe you are someone with that kind of a story. And it's the kind of journey that could maybe paralyze somebody, convincing someone that they don't have the right kind of background to be used by God. But over the years, I've seen how leaders have proved that they're not disqualified because of their story. In fact, they have allowed God's renewal work to be a gift to others. And they have the unique ability to relate with young people who come from a difficult home. So you see, as we turn to Jesus and allow His renewal work to unfold in our lives, we realize that we don't have to hide the broken pieces of our story. Instead, we can offer hope to others that God really can bring about something beautiful in the midst of life's mess. So maybe you felt those snares in the past, and maybe you felt the regret of that way of death, but hopefully you're seeing that God is doing something new. And whatever paths you've gone down in the past, they do not disqualify you. In fact, maybe there's someone around you who needs to see how God has worked in your life, who needs to know that they're not alone, and they need to have someone come alongside them and say, God's working in my life, and He can work in your life too. So recognize that the lens you see the world through, it is shaped by the story you've lived. And in your story, the lures you face are maybe different than me. What smells fresh and alluring to you might not be the same as the struggles of those around you. But be aware of how sin, it will play with your ego. Because there's a hook within the lure. A snare that's only going to drag us away from the life we were made for. So name the traps in your life. Call them out. And recognize that the way of wisdom, it is a path of resistance. And we need to be smart about this. Hold firmly to the truth that Jesus will give you the strength and the guidance to shift the patterns and lead you into the way of life. And as God's renewal work unfolds in your life, trust that you are not disqualified. God's healing work in your life might be the signal of hope to somebody else that it's possible for them to be set free as well. So I'm going to invite us to stand. And we're going to sing one more song as a declaration, as a truth that, God, you've called us together, and you restore the broken bits of our lives, and you are doing something new and something good in this world and in each and every one of us. So I'm going to hand it to the band to lead us.